In a city that forgot how to scream, music became the law and silence the obedience. But in a forgotten frequency, between one heartbeat and the next, a question was born. And so it began when the music lied. Welcome to Unclosed, where stories begin but never truly end. Tonight, I'll tell you a story you've never heard before. Neo-Veridia sang before it ever spoke. Its voice was not human, and it was not alive in any ordinary sense. It was a chorus of metal, glass, and engineered light. Traffic signals pulsed in a patient rhythm. Rain tapped the synthetic pavement like a drummer rehearsing. Dawn did not arrive so much as it was scheduled. A soft blue sweep across every window that felt more like a lullaby than a sunrise. Beneath that polished surface ran the hum. It was steady, merciful, precise. Citizens called it peace. Grief dulled into ache. Anger softened into confusion. Joy became a comfortable boredom. Serenity was uniform. Billboards whispered affirmations. Elevators glided. Doors never slammed. Even voices moved in harmony. It was not magic. It was engineering. The broadcast authority, perched in Obsidian Peak, had mapped the frequencies of a human heart. They found jagged waves of fear and betrayal and drowned them under the harmonic. On paper, social balance. In practice, a warm, invisible hand pressed over the city's mouth. Perfection had a price. Someone had to hold the tone. Someone had to listen for the drift, the discordant notes that appeared when suffering grew too loud for the broadcast to mask. A single unmodulated scream could ripple across a district in minutes and threaten the entire grid. Silas Thorne was an anomaly. At 11, while other children were lulled by classroom emitters, he pressed his ear to a cold stone wall and heard resistance. At 13, standing in a crowded plaza, he felt the city's heart skip, a silence like a falling elevator. At 14, he laid his palm on a sun-warmed sidewalk and sensed a pulse beneath it, slower and older than electricity. He kept those moments like forbidden relics. He did not speak of the silence beneath the sound. To speak of it was to be flagged for harmonic recalibration. Now, as a man, Silas moved through the outer markets at dawn. Fruit glowed in neat geometric patterns under ultraviolet stalls. Vendors hummed as they arranged their wares, their voices folding into the anchor tone hidden beneath the counters. Silas paused not to look at fruit, but to listen to the tiny speaker buried under a wooden countertop. He could taste the note on his tongue, metallic and sharp, like an approaching storm. Cameras disguised as architectural flourishes tracked him. They measured the depth of his stride, the regularity of his breath, every small deviation from the city's flow. Somewhere in a sterile control room, a board technician saw the data spike and marked it ambient noise. No one was truly awake at that hour. That was the point of the early broadcast. Across Sector 7, Leora timed her thoughts to the hum. As a senior technician for the antenna grids, she knew how the city stayed asleep. She could smile in high-stakes meetings, her heart rate synchronized with the room's emitters, while her mind imagined the impossible, silence. To her, true silence felt obscene, like a scream in a library or a splash of red paint on a white canvas. She had not always been a technician who obeyed the grid. Once, as a young engineer, she had watched a child in a plaza press his ear to a wall and laugh at nothing. The child's laughter had been raw, unmodulated, and something in her had shifted. She filed the memory away like contraband. Years later, when she found millisecond drops in amplitude, tiny stubborn gaps where the broadcast faltered, she logged them and watched her supervisors erase the reports. Electronic noise, they said. Irrelevant fluctuations. She kept a secret in the back of her mind. Her sister Mara, curled in a dream chair after a minor accident. The authority had called it precautionary recalibration. Leora had watched the monitors as the emitters smoothed Mara's panic into a pleasant, vacant smile. The sister who had once cursed at the rain and loved loud music became a woman who hummed contentment at the sight of a synthetic sunrise. That image hardened something inside her. It became the hinge that would later swing her toward betrayal. Far below the polished streets, in the humid tunnels of the Undercity, men in orange uniforms kept the generators honest. The hum sounded different down there. It lost its sweetness and became obligation, the heavy thud of debt paid in sweat. The miners called the deeper vibration the mountain's grumble. The authority called it equipment fatigue and increased the sedative dosage in the miners' air. Silas had been 16 when his father, once a lead engineer for the authority, took him into Vein 3. The air was thick with glittering dust, and the walls hummed with a light that felt trapped. Silas pressed his palm to a vein of raw quartz. Beneath the emitter's engineered calm, he felt a heartbeat, slower, heavier, alive. "Keep moving," the overseer barked. "Ignore the noise. The grid is being recalibrated." Silas could not ignore the countersong. Each tremor in the rock carried a memory the city had tried to erase. He felt echoes of miners lost in cave-ins decades ago. He heard the whisper of machines that had failed during construction. The stone was an archive, and the hum of coat of paint tried to hide the rust. That night, the glowing streets felt like a hallucination. The city's serenity was a mask, and his ears carried the mountain's defiance. He realized the hum was not infinite. It was a mask stretched so thin that truth began to poke through. Time moved differently for Silas after that. He kept the mountain's pulse in his bones. He learned to listen for the drift and to count the fractions of a second when the broadcast faltered. He learned to hide the way he breathed. He learned to make small adjustments to his face and hands so the cameras read him as ordinary. He learned to carry silence like contraband. Then the isolation came unexpectedly. A tremor shifted a stairwell in the lower districts, and Silas found himself trapped in a forgotten maintenance shaft, a narrow tube of cold steel smelling of rust and stale air. He had not planned to be there. Hours became days. He measured time by his pulse, which sounded shockingly loud without the city's broadcast. The hum was muffled, blocked by layers of stone and shielding. Without the constant lullaby, his thoughts sharpened into points. He remembered his father's voice. "Listen deeper than the machines, Silas. The machines only know what they are told. The earth knows what it is." He pressed his ear to the steel wall. At first there was only void, then a vibration, slow and deliberate, like the heartbeat of a sleeping titan. The mountain was patient and alive. By the second day, thirst gnawed at him. He licked condensation from cold pipes, water tasting of iron and dust. His body weakened, but his senses widened. He began to hear things no human was meant to hear. Dust settling, the microscopic sigh of cooling stone, tectonic plates shifting miles beneath his feet. Phantoms came in the dark. His mother, seen only in fading holograms, walked through steel like mist. His father sat at the far end of the shaft, skin glowing with quartz dust. They watched him without speaking. He whispered to them, begged for a way out, cursed them for leaving him in a world of glass and noise. The phantoms remained silent. By the fifth day, the phantoms faded and the shaft became a cathedral of vibration. Every time Silas tapped the wall, the echo returned like a map. He tapped patterns, tap, tap, pause, tap, and the rock answered. He realized he was not alone. The mountain listened. It was a dialogue of frequency. "I'm not alone," he thought. The mountain listens. On the seventh day, hunger hollowed him. His stomach clenched and then stopped. His body became a light shell, his mind wide as the city above. He heard people in the plazas like trapped bees in a jar. He heard the screams of miners who had died a century ago, recorded in the crystalline structure of the quartz. On the 10th day, a rescue team arrived. They were not looking for a boy. They were clearing the shaft to run a new fiber optic cable for the authority. When drones cut through the steel, they found Silas sitting cross-legged in the center of the tube. His eyes were wide, and he tapped a rhythm against the floor too complex for a human mind. When the artificial lights hit his face, he did not blink. He looked at the technicians and whispered for words that made their blood run cold. "You are too loud." His voice carried the mountain's weight, ancient, unyielding, and clear. The rescuers recoiled. They thought they had saved a starving child. In truth, they had awakened a conductor. 15 years later, Neo-Veridia would reach the peak of its illusion while he waited in the shadows. Silas's workshop was hidden in the ozone void, a district so polluted and forgotten that the broadcast signal was weak and distorted. His walls were lined with lead mesh and tangled copper coils that hung like mechanical vines. Piles of sand muffled vibration. In that room, the hum could not reach. Silence had weight there. He had become a myth, the frequency merchant. He built silence nodes, crystalline devices that created pockets of absolute quiet 10 feet across. People came to him in secret when the bliss wave failed to drown their reality. They came when betrayal refused to be forgotten, or when loss was so deep that the engineered calm felt like mockery. They paid him in secrets, loyalty, and shards of resonance stolen from minds. In the back of the workshop, Silas kept a simple diagram on a scrap of metal. The broadcast mapped memory to frequency, like grooves on a record. A note at the right pitch could overwrite a groove or erase it. He explained it to those who came in plain words, so they would not be frightened. The mind remembers in patterns, he said, and the harmonic plays over those patterns until the original shape is lost. One evening, Kale arrived. His brass chest hissed with every movement as his arrow. Lung a broken metronome. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a man who had not slept in a decade. I can't take it anymore, Silas, Kale rasped. The authority raised the gratitude pulse this morning. My teeth ache. My head feels full of bees. But I still hear them, the men I left in Vein 3. Their screams are cutting through the music now. The broadcast isn't strong enough to hide what I did. Silas did not look up from his oscilloscope. The green line danced in jagged patterns, the true sound of the city's foundations. The mountain is waking, Kale. The fracking in the lower sectors has reached the mantle. The hum can't mask the earth's groan anymore. People are waking in the night screaming. They don't know why. They're hearing the truth for the first time in 300 years. Kale leaned closer, the hiss of his lungs filling the room. Is it true, Silas? The rumor, the sovereign son? Are you really going to drop the veil? Silas raised his obsidian eyes. The veil is a lie, Kale. I'm not dropping it. I'm giving the mountain a microphone. Kale recoiled. If you cut the broadcast, the neural links will short. Millions have their memories tied to that frequency. Half the city will die. The other half will lose their minds. It will be a massacre. It will be an awakening, Silas said. You've lived in a curated dream your whole life. Reality has weight. Yes, people will die, but those who live will finally be real. They will own their sins. Just like you. Kale's mechanical lungs hissed faster. You're a monster, Silas. You don't want freedom. You want the world to feel as dead and cold as you did in that shaft. Silas smiled, thin and merciless. In that shaft, Kale, I was the only thing in this city that was truly alive. The workshop fell into heavy silence. The green line steadied into a single defiant pulse. Outside, Neo-Veridia hummed its hollow tune. Inside, the frequency merchant prepared to rewrite the world's song. To do it, he needed the golden voice that had once been the city's pride. Julian Thorne had been the architect of the peace frequencies. His voice was the golden bomb millions heard each morning, the sound that made them forget hunger and grief. He was untouchable until the optimization of residential Spire 7. Julian's wife Elena and daughter Clara lived in that spire. The authority sent a recalibration surge through the building, a routine maintenance that went wrong. The math was flawed. The surge turned every nervous system in the building into a feedback loop. Elena and Clara died in their living room, their minds shattered by the very frequency Julian had helped design. The authority offered Julian a memory correction. He refused. In an act of savage defiance, he tore the neural link from his skull with his bare hands, leaving a scar that would never heal. He descended into the Undercity, a ghost searching for silence. Silas found him in a drip bar, hunched over a glass of synthetic oil, his voice like broken glass. I don't want your help, Silas, Julian muttered. I just want to die in a world that doesn't sound like a refrigerator. Silas leaned in. Then come with me. I don't need your golden voice for comfort. I need it for destruction. Only someone who knows the math of the hum can carry the frequency that breaks it. Julian's body changed. His skin grew pale and translucent, veins glowing faintly as minerals bonded with his blood. He stopped being a man and became a transmitter. He kept one anchor to his humanity, Clara's red silk ribbon in his pocket. The ribbon is your weakness, Silas said. If you want the sovereign frequency, you must let it go. Julian's voice came from inside the tank, calm and unyielding. The ribbon is the only thing in this city that is real, Silas. If I let it go, I'm just another machine for your revolution. I'm keeping it. Silas watched the monitors. He knew the authorities' firewall could only be broken by a soul sharpened by grief into a blade. Leora finally betrayed the authority. She had watched the drops in amplitude and the erased reports. She had watched her sister placed in a dream chair during a routine recalibration and seen the woman's eyes glaze into a pleasant, empty smile. Leora could not unsee the moment her sister's grief was smoothed into a curated memory. She found Silas and offered the route through the cooling ducts, the microseconds between pulses, the deadbeats. They moved like ghosts. The peak rose like a cathedral of black glass and jagged stone, quartz pillars humming with electricity. Wraiths, sound drones, patrolled the outer terraces. They had to move in the dead beats, the tiny gaps between pulses. They wore suits that shimmered faintly, fabric vibrating against their skin like a second heartbeat, tuned to slip unseen through the city sensors. The ascent was a brutal test of endurance. Kale carried resonance shards and staggered under the weight. Julian, wired to the core by silver cables, walked with a faint inner light. Leora guided them, hands steady though her voice shook. At the aperture, a platform suspended over a bottomless pit of light, Julian was connected to the core. Silver cables fed tectonic resonance into his spine. This was the only language left, Silas thought, and the thought steadied him. Silas, Leora whispered the power levels. If we fire the core now, the hospital wards will be affected. My sister. Then she will be the first free woman in 300 years, Silas said. Isn't that what you wanted? Truth at any cost. Kale staggered to an auxiliary panel, his lungs failing. The authority is rerouting power to the wards. If you fire the core, now you'll be the greatest murderer in history. Silas turned, obsidian eyes burning. The authority thinks empathy is a firewall. They don't know I have none left. Fire the core. Kale lunged for the override. Silas was faster. His ceramic blade cut the aerolung's pipes and severed the connection. Kale collapsed, his last breath a wet gurgle. Leora stared as Silas said flatly, I am the truth. The clock hit 0. Now, Julian, Silas roared over the turbine's rising scream. Give them the silence they deserve. Julian opened his mouth. He did not scream. He exhaled. The sovereign frequency, the 7.83 hertz heartbeat of the Earth, hit the quartz lattice. The hum died instantly. Neural links sparked and failed. The holographic sapphire sky shattered into a million jagged pieces, revealing the gray, rotting sky beneath. Millions fell to their knees, clutching their heads as 300 years of suppressed grief, anger, and memory returned like a tidal wave of knives. Julian felt it all, every death, every betrayal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Clara's red ribbon. He looked at it once. I'm coming, Clara, he whispered and dropped the ribbon into the core's light. The human variable short-circuited the peak's logic. Quartz pillars shattered. The mountain imploded, reclaiming its silence and dragging Neo-Veridia's archive into the abyss. The city that had been built on curated calm collapsed into honest ruin. The fall did not come with a single roar. It unfolded in stages. First the lights failed, then the dream chairs convulsed as memories surged back, then the water systems clogged with sediment from ruptured veins. Fires spread where circuits shorted. Towers cracked, their glass faces collapsing into shards. The authorities' sanctuaries became islands of broken machinery and screaming technicians. Silas did not watch from a rooftop. He wandered through the ruins of Sector 4 like a man who had finally become one with stone. Blind and deaf to the new noise, his senses pulverized, he reached a frozen park and sat on a jagged granite block. He tapped. There was no answer. He tapped again. Only silence. The mountain was quiet at last. 3 days later, the city was unrecognizable. The sapphire sky was gone, replaced by a heavy gray atmosphere thick with smoke. Holographic suns had burned out, leaving a permanent, honest twilight. For the first time in centuries, the city breathed without rhythm. Streets filled with people who shivered in the cold and cried openly, voices raw and uneven. In the days that followed, small scenes of human truth unfolded like stubborn flowers through cracked concrete. A woman in a ruined plaza screamed the name of a child she suddenly remembered. A technician who had once erased reports sat on a curb and wept for the first time in his life, the tears hot and real. Leora found her sister among the survivors, eyes red and raw, and they did not speak at first. They only held each other and let the unmediated sound of sobbing fill the air. A young girl approached Silas. Her oversized coat was dirty and frayed. She did not know he had shattered her utopia. She only saw a man sitting alone in the snow. She sat beside him, took his cold, scarred hand, and pressed it to her small chest. Silas could not hear her heartbeat. He could not hear the wind, but he felt it, the irregular, fragile, wonderfully chaotic thud-thud of a human heart. It was a sound with no frequency to control. It did not need a broadcast to exist. Silas closed his eyes and let out a breath that was not a struggle. Later, when he walked the ruined market where he had once listened to a hidden speaker, he saw the same girl again, trading a shard of quartz for a scrap of bread. She had been there the morning he first noticed the storm node on his tongue, a small, unremarked presence in the crowd. He had not known then that she would be the one to sit beside him in the snow. The city had been full of such small, unnoticed people, children and old men and vendors, whose lives had been smoothed into pleasantness by the hum. Now their edges were sharp again. Rebuilding began not as a plan, but as a series of small, stubborn acts. People cleared rubble with bare hands. They shared water and stories. Leora organized teams to salvage the antenna arrays, not to restore the hum, but to repurpose the hardware into radios and pumps. Kale, who had once carried shards and secrets, walked the tunnels and helped the miners who had survived, his brass chest clanking with each step. He did not ask for forgiveness. He worked until his hands bled. Julian did not survive the implosion. His body was found near the core, pale and still, the red ribbon gone. Some said he had died with a smile. Others said he had been consumed by the mountain he had tried to speak for. Silas kept the memory of Julian like a tuning fork, an instrument that had been struck and could not be unstruck. Months later, the city was different in ways both small and vast. The holographic domes were gone. The air was raw and sometimes bitter. People argued loudly and sometimes cruelly. They also sang badly and beautifully in the streets. Children learned to shout and to cry and to laugh without the softening hand of a broadcast. Memory returned in jagged pieces, names, faces, the taste of a real orange. The cost had been high. The cost had been real. Silas continued to walk the city, a man who had given the world its silence and then watched it fill with sound. He still carried his tools, still made silence nodes for those who needed a moment of quiet to grieve without the world pressing in. He did not pretend the choice had been clean. He had killed to free a city and had watched the city bleed. He had taken lives and given truth. The ledger of his acts was a long, black line. One evening, as the sun, real and thin, slid behind a ruined tower, Silas found the girl again. She had grown a little, her coat patched with fabric scavenged from the old dream chairs. She handed him a small stone, smooth and warm from the day. "For listening," she said, and smiled with a mouth that had not been tuned. Silas took the stone and felt, for the first time in a long while, a sound that was not engineered or ancient but immediate, the girl's laugh, bright and uneven. It had no frequency to be controlled. It was messy and human and perfect. The mountain was quiet. The silence was full. The city, at last, had a sound that belonged to itself. No longer the city that forgot how to scream, but the city that remembered how to breathe. Because they finally knew, not every broadcast is truth, and not every truth is sung. This is Unclosed, where stories begin, but never truly end. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until we meet again, good night.